I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror at work, adjusting my blazer and trying to calm my nerves when my phone buzzed. The message from my mother popped up. Marlo's getting married. Engagement party tonight at 7. Don't be late. My name is Alara, and that's how I found out my little sister was engaged, through a last-minute text message on what was supposed to be my big day. I'd spent the morning practicing my acceptance speech for my promotion to senior account manager. At 28, I was the youngest person to reach this position at Carson and Mills Marketing. My team had even planned a celebration for after the announcement. Alara? Everyone's waiting in the conference room. My colleague Rachel poked her head into the bathroom. You okay? Yeah, just. I showed her my phone. Wow, that's some timing. Rachel's reflection grimaced beside mine. Your sister really knows how to steal the spotlight, huh? I forced a smile. It's fine. I should be happy for her. But it wasn't fine. Nothing about Marlo's relationship with Oliver Grant had been fine for the past year. I'd seen how he subtly corrected her table manners at family dinners, how he always seemed to be helping her make better choices, his choices. Yet my parents were thrilled about their precious baby girl landing such a catch. The promotion ceremony went exactly as planned. I gave my speech, accepted congratulations, and smiled for photos while my mind raced with questions. Who was organizing this party? How long had they known? Why hadn't anyone told me? By 6:30, I was pulling up to my parents' house in my work clothes, having barely had time to touch up my makeup. Cars lined both sides of the street. Clearly, everyone else had gotten more notice than I had. My mother met me at the door, frowning at my outfit. Alara, couldn't you have changed? This is a special occasion. I came straight from work, Mom. I had my promotion ceremony today, remember? The one I told you about last week? Oh, right. She waved her hand dismissively. Well, come in. Marlo's been asking where you were. The house was packed with familiar faces, aunts, uncles, family, friends, and Oliver's wealthy circle. In the center of it all stood Marlo, radiant in a pale blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, showing off a diamond ring that could have paid for a small car. Alara, she squealed when she saw me, rushing over to grab my hands. Isn't it amazing? Oliver proposed this morning at sunrise on the beach. It was so romantic. Behind her, Oliver appeared, sliding an arm around her waist. We wanted to celebrate right away, he said smoothly. Sorry for the short notice. Something in his tone made me pause. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he looked at me, and I noticed how his fingers pressed just a little too firmly into Marlo's side. Congratulations, I managed, watching as Marlo unconsciously adjusted her posture to match Oliver's preference for perfect poise. We're thinking a spring wedding, Marlo continued, but Oliver cut in. Actually, darling, we discussed winter would be better. More elegant. Oh, right, Marlo's smile flickered. Winter, of course. I felt my stomach twist. This was the pattern. Marlo suggesting, Oliver correcting, Marlo yielding. But no one else seemed to notice or care. My father appeared with champagne, beaming at the happy couple. To Marlo and Oliver. As everyone raised their glasses, Oliver's eyes met mine again. This time, there was something challenging in his gaze, as if daring me to say what I was thinking. He knew I saw through him, and he wanted me to know that it didn't matter. I lifted my glass with the others, but inside, something shifted. My sister might be blind to what was happening, but I wasn't. And unlike everyone else in this room, I wasn't going to stand by and watch Oliver Grant destroy her. The question was, how do you save someone who doesn't want to be saved? A week after the engagement party, my mother insisted on hosting a family dinner to discuss wedding plans. I almost declined, but something in my gut told me I needed to be there. That same instinct had me arriving 15 minutes early, just in time to catch an exchange I wasn't meant to hear. Really, darling, you should let me handle the guest list. Oliver's voice drifted from the kitchen. Your college friends might not quite fit the atmosphere we're going for. I paused in the hallway, my hand still on the front door handle. But Katie's been my best friend since freshman year, Marlo protested weakly. And she's lovely, but you have to think about appearances. My business partners will be there, And you want to make the right impression, don't you? The silence that followed made my skin crawl. I cleared my throat loudly and walked into the kitchen, pretending I'd just arrived. Marlo was standing at the counter, chopping vegetables with unusual intensity while Oliver lounged against the refrigerator, looking perfectly at ease. "Need any help?" I asked, watching Marlo's knife come down harder than necessary on an innocent carrot. "Everything's under control," Oliver answered for her. "Isn't it, sweetheart?" Marlo nodded without looking up. Our parents arrived moments later, my mother fussing over Oliver's choice of wine while my father retreated to his usual chair with the evening paper. The scene was so normal it felt surreal, like watching actors perform a play about a perfect family. So, my mother began once we were seated. "Oliver's found the most wonderful wedding planner. She did the Henderson wedding last year. You remember how gorgeous that was, Gordon." My father mumbled something noncommittal from behind his wine glass. "Actually," Marlo spoke up, "I was thinking maybe something smaller might be nice. More intimate." Oliver's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Darling, we discussed this. A winter wedding at the Grand Plaza. Everything's practically arranged." "I know, but—" Marlo, my mother cut in. "Don't be difficult. Oliver knows what's best. And speaking of the Grand Plaza, Alara, did you hear they're looking for a new marketing team?" Oliver mentioned he could put in a word. "I just got promoted at my current job," I reminded her, gripping my knife a little tighter. "Remember?" "Oh, but this would be such an upgrade." "Oliver, tell her about their benefits package." I watched Oliver's practiced smile spread across his face. "I'd be happy to make some introductions. After all, we're going to be family soon. We should help each other succeed, shouldn't we?" The way he emphasized succeed made it clear what he really meant. Fall in line. "I'm doing fine on my own, thanks," I said, meeting his gaze directly. Something flickered behind his eyes, annoyance, maybe even anger, before his smooth mask slipped back into place. "Speaking of success," he turned to Marlo, "tell them about your decision, darling." Marlo pushed her food around her plate. "I'm taking a break from my graphic design work. Oliver thinks it would be better to focus on the wedding and other priorities." "You're quitting your job?" I couldn't keep the shock from my voice. Marlo had fought hard for her position at that design studio. "Taking a break," Oliver corrected firmly. "A wife in my position has certain social obligations to consider." "And what position is that exactly?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother shot me a warning look, but I kept my eyes on Oliver. He dabbed his mouth with his napkin, taking his time before responding. "I only want what's best for Marlo. Someone has to think about her future, don't they?" The implication was clear. He thought she couldn't think for herself. "Marlo's perfectly capable," I started, but my father finally lowered his paper. "Let's not argue at dinner," he said quietly, and just like that, the subject was closed. Later, as Oliver helped my mother clear the plates, I caught Marlo's arm. "Are you sure about all this?" For a moment, something like doubt crossed her face. Then Oliver called her name from the kitchen, and whatever she'd been about to say vanished behind her practiced smile. "Everything's perfect," she insisted, but her voice trembled slightly. "Really, Alara, everything's exactly how it should be." I watched her hurry to join Oliver and realized with growing certainty that nothing about this was how it should be. Not even close. The truth came out in the middle of Bergdorf's, of all places. My mother had dragged us there for wedding dress shopping, insisting I come along for sisterly support. I was hanging back, watching Marlo try on the 5th ivory masterpiece of the day when her credit card was declined. The saleswoman's practiced smile never wavered. "Perhaps another card?" Marlo's face flushed as she dug through her designer purse. "I don't understand. There must be some mistake." My mother stepped forward, already reaching for her own wallet, but I caught a glimpse of the statement Marlo had hastily stuffed back into her bag. The number at the bottom had way too many digits. "I've got this one," my mother announced, but I noticed how Marlo wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Later, while our mother was discussing alterations with the seamstress, I cornered Marlo in the fitting room. "How bad is it?" I asked quietly. She smoothed invisible wrinkles from the silk gown. It's nothing, just a temporary thing with the card company. Marlo. Oliver's handling it, she snapped, then immediately softened her tone. He says I just need to learn better financial management. Once we're married, he'll take care of everything. Everything? I picked up her discarded purse, the receipt from earlier visible. Like he's taking care of the $30,000 you already owe? Her eyes widened. You went through my things? I saw the statement by accident. What happened? You don't understand, she said, fingers twisting in the expensive fabric. Oliver's world is different. There are expectations. The right clothes, the right accessories, the right everything. I needed to keep up. By maxing out your cards? Marlo, this isn't you. Since when do you care about? Since I found someone who actually believes in me. Her voice cracked. Oliver says I have potential. He sees something in me that. He sees someone he can control, I cut in. He's already got you quitting your job, cutting off your friends, and now you're in debt trying to be his perfect trophy wife? You're just jealous, Marlo hissed, but there were tears in her eyes. You've always been jealous that I found someone while you're still alone, focused on your precious career. Ladies? The saleswoman's voice floated through the curtain. Is everything all right? Fine, Marlo called back, wiping her eyes carefully. Everything's fine. But later, as we were leaving the store, I overheard Oliver on the phone outside. He'd arrived to pick up Marlo and hadn't noticed me approaching. Of course I know about the cards, he was saying to someone. It's perfect, actually. The more dependent she is, the easier this will be. Trust me, by the time we're married, she'll be completely. Oh, hold on. He spotted me and ended the call smoothly. Alara, how lovely to see you. How was the dress shopping? Interesting, I said, studying his face. Lots of revelations today. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes, but his smile never faltered. I hope you're not implying anything unfortunate. After all, we're going to be family soon. It would be a shame if something came between us. Before I could respond, Marlo burst out of the store and threw herself into his arms. Oliver, you didn't have to come all this way. Nonsense, darling. I'll always be here to take care of you. He kissed her forehead, eyes locked on mine over her head. That's what family does, isn't it? I watched them drive away, my sister chattering happily about wedding details while Oliver nodded indulgently. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. Don't make waves, Alara. Marlo's happy. Let her have this. But I couldn't. Not after what I'd heard. Oliver wasn't just controlling Marlo. He was systematically isolating her, making her dependent on him. And now I had proof he was doing it deliberately. The question was, would anyone believe me if I told them? Or would I just become the jealous older sister trying to ruin her baby sister's happiness? I pulled out my phone again and opened my banking app. If I was going to fight Oliver Grant, I needed ammunition. And bank statements never lie. 3 days of digging through financial records had given me a migraine and a disturbing picture of Oliver Grant. His company's success was built on a pattern of hostile takeovers and questionable partnerships. But it wasn't until I found Katie's social media post that everything clicked. Katie, Marlo's supposedly distant best friend, had posted a photo from 6 months ago. It showed her and Marlo at lunch, and in the background, partially obscured but unmistakable, was Oliver, with another woman. I was downloading the image when Rachel appeared at my office door. Your sister's here. Marlo stood in the lobby, fidgeting with her engagement ring. She looked smaller somehow, wearing a conservative dress I didn't recognize. Can we talk? She asked. Somewhere private? I led her to the building's rooftop garden, where she immediately burst into tears. Oliver's lawyer sent over some papers. A prenup, but there's something wrong with it. I can barely understand half of it, and when I asked questions, Oliver said I was being difficult. Let me see. She pulled out a crumpled document. As I read, my stomach turned. The agreement wasn't just unfair, it was predatory. Marlo would forfeit all financial independence, with clauses buried in legal jargon that would leave her with nothing if they divorced. Have you shown this to Dad? I asked. Oliver says involving lawyers will just complicate things. He wants me to sign it tomorrow. She twisted the ring again. He says it's about trust. It's about control. I pulled up the photo on my phone. Just like this is. Marlo stared at the image, color draining from her face. That's from before we were serious. He said he'd ended things with her. When exactly did you start dating? February. I think. Everything happened so fast. This photo is from March. I zoomed in on the timestamp. And that woman? I found 3 other photos of them together from April. You've been investigating him? Her voice sharpened. Why can't you just be happy for me? Because he's lying to you. About everything. I thrust the prenup at her. Look at this clause here. It gives him control of any inheritance you receive. Did you know Mom and Dad updated their will last year? She shook her head slowly. And what about your credit cards? The ones he said he'd handle? Has he actually paid them off? He said he would. After the wedding. After you're legally bound to him and all your assets are under his control. Marlo stood abruptly, hugging herself. You don't understand. I love him. Do you? Or do you love who you thought he was? I have to go. She gathered her things with shaking hands. Oliver's expecting me for dinner with his partners. Marlo, wait. Just stay out of it, Alara. Please. I watched her hurry away, already typing on her phone, probably texting Oliver to reassure him. My own phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Careful where you dig, Miss Thompson. Some things are better left buried. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. Oliver knew I was investigating him, which meant he was watching me too. Back in my office, I pulled up everything I'd found. The financial records, the photos, the prenup. My sister was walking into a trap, and I had proof. But proof wasn't enough. Marlo had to want to see the truth. Another message arrived. Family dinner tomorrow night. Oliver insists. Don't be late. This one was from my mother, but I could feel Oliver's influence behind the words. He was forcing a confrontation, confident he could maintain control. I looked at the evidence spread across my desk. Going to that dinner meant putting everything on the line. My relationship with my sister, my standing in the family, maybe even my safety. Given Oliver's warning, not going meant abandoning Marlo to his manipulation. I started organizing the documents into a folder, my decision made. Oliver Grant wanted to play games? Fine, but he was about to learn that some sisters are willing to burn everything down to protect their own. Tomorrow night would change everything. I just hoped Marlo would forgive me for what I had to do. The family dinner felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. I arrived early, folder of evidence tucked in my bag, to find Oliver already there, helping my mother set the table as if he owned the place. Marlo sat nearby, unnaturally quiet, her engagement ring glinting like a shackle. Just in time, Oliver smiled. I was telling your parents about an interesting conversation I had with your boss today. My hand froze on the back of my chair. Excuse me? Oliver's been so helpful, my mother beamed. He mentioned your difficulties at work lately. The missed meetings, the suspicious computer activity. What exactly did you tell them? I kept my voice steady, though my heart hammered. Only my concerns about your well-being, Oliver said smoothly. After all, investigating private financial records during work hours could be seen as problematic. The threat was clear. He'd gotten to my job before I could expose him. My father cleared his throat. Alara, if you're having troubles. I'm not. I pulled out my chair, the scrape against the floor cutting through the tension. But since we're discussing concerning behavior, should we talk about the prenup, Oliver? Marlo's head snapped up. Alara, don't. Or maybe the photos with Jessica Morgan from April? I continued. The ones taken while you were supposedly exclusive with my sister? Oliver's smile didn't waver, but his knuckles whitened around his water glass. I think you're misinterpreting. Show them, Marlo suddenly interrupted. Her voice was barely a whisper. Everyone turned to look at her. Show them what? My mother asked. My hands shook slightly as I reached for my bag, but Oliver spoke first. Darling, remember what we discussed about your anxiety? How you sometimes imagine. I saw the prenup, my father cut in quietly. All eyes shifted to him. Marlo brought it to my office this morning. Oliver's mask slipped for just a moment. That was meant to be private. Like the clause about her inheritance? I pulled out the documents. Or the one about controlling all her future earnings. Or maybe we should discuss your company's pattern of targeting vulnerable businesses, stripping their assets, and… Enough. Oliver slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. For the first time, his careful facade cracked. You have no idea what you're talking about. I think she does, Marlo said, standing slowly. I called Jessica today. The room went deadly quiet. You did what? Oliver's voice was dangerous now. She told me everything. About how you did the same thing to her, the expensive gifts, the debt, the isolation. How you nearly destroyed her family's company after she broke things off. Marlo, sweetheart, my mother started, but Marlo held up her hand. I also called the bank, she continued, growing stronger. The credit card debt you promised to handle, it's been transferred to my name. All of it. Oliver stood, his charm evaporating entirely. You ungrateful little. Choose your next words very carefully, I warned, pulling out my phone. I'm recording. He looked around the table, seeing the shifting allegiances. My father's quiet anger. My mother's dawning horror. Marlo's trembling defiance. This isn't over, he snarled, grabbing his coat. Actually, it is, Marlo said. She pulled off the engagement ring and set it on the table. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Your lawyer, actually. Turns out she was very interested in some of your recent activities. Oliver's face went white. Without another word, he stormed out, the front door slamming behind him. The silence that followed felt like glass about to shatter. Then Marlo burst into tears, and our mother rushed to hold her. My father picked up the documents I'd brought, reading them with a clenched jaw. I sat there, adrenaline draining, when I felt Marlo's hand grab mine under the table. She squeezed once, hard, and I knew without words what she was saying. Thank you. I'm sorry. I should have listened. But this wasn't over. Oliver's threat hung in the air, and I knew him well enough now to know he wouldn't go quietly. The question was, what would he do next? And more importantly, were we ready for it? The email arrived at 3 a.m., 3 days after the dinner confrontation. I'd been sleeping on Marlo's couch since then, neither of us wanting to be alone. The subject line was simple, your choice. Oliver had been busy. Attached were photos of every person I'd contacted during my investigation, every document I'd accessed, every call I'd made. The message below was equally simple. Board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Come alone or these go to the SEC. I sat in the dark, staring at my laptop screen until Marlo found me. What's wrong? She clicked on a lamp. Alara. I closed the laptop. Nothing, just work stuff. But at 8:45 the next morning, I stood in front of Oliver's office building, my hands shaking as I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my boss, 2 from my father, and a text from Marlo. Where are you? The lawyer's waiting. I turned my phone off and walked inside. Oliver's executive suite took up the entire top floor. He was waiting by the window, backlit by morning sun, looking every bit the successful businessman he pretended to be. Right on time, he smiled. Always the responsible one, aren't you? What do you want? Want? I want you to understand your position. He gestured to a folder on his desk. Inside is a confession, detailing how you illegally accessed private financial records, manipulated my former fiancé, and attempted to sabotage my company. That's ridiculous. Is it? Your digital footprints say otherwise. And your company's board would be very interested to know how you used their resources for your personal vendetta. My throat went dry. You're the one who… I'm the one who built something, he cut in sharply. While you played detective, I was creating wealth, opportunities, connections. Do you really think anyone will believe your version over mine? He was right. I'd been so focused on protecting Marlo, I'd left myself exposed. Every move I'd made to uncover his schemes could be twisted to incriminate me instead. Sign the confession, he continued. Take full responsibility. In return, I'll ensure you merely lose your job, rather than face criminal charges. And of course, I'll leave your sister's debt exactly where it is, in her name. You're insane. I'm practical. You have 10 minutes to decide. He walked to the door. "Oh, and don't bother recording this conversation." The room scrambled. Alone in his office, I opened the folder. The confession was meticulous, turning every piece of evidence I'd gathered against me. My hands trembled as I reached the signature line. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I'd turned it back on out of habit. A message from an unknown number. "Check your email." Now, using Oliver's own computer, I logged into my account. There it was, an email from his lawyer. Not to me, but to the firm's ethics board, copied to me by mistake. It detailed Oliver's pattern of manipulation, including recordings of his threats to other women before Marlo. The timestamp, 2 minutes ago. The door opened. Oliver strode in, phone to his ear, face contorted with rage. "What do you mean, resigned?" "I own your—" He froze, seeing his computer screen. "Your lawyer," I said, quietly standing. "The one Marlo talked to? Apparently, she's been gathering her own evidence. For months." Oliver lunged for the computer, but I was already forwarding the email to everyone I knew. His hand caught my arm, bruisingly tight. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled. "I'll destroy you." "No," a voice came from the doorway. "You won't." My father stood there, phone recording, with 2 police officers behind him. "Assault," he said calmly. "Witnessed and recorded. Would you like to add that to the growing list of charges?" Oliver released me, stepping back as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. But watching the officers read him his rights, I felt no triumph. Just bone-deep exhaustion and a haunting question: how many other women had he done this to? And how many others like him were still out there, hiding behind wealth and power? The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The courthouse hallway felt endless as we waited for Oliver's bail hearing to begin. 3 weeks had passed since his arrest, and the media circus had only grown as more victims came forward. I sat between Marlo and my mother, both unusually quiet, while my father paced nearby. "He's going to get out, isn't he?" Marlo's voice was barely a whisper. Before I could answer, the doors opened. Oliver walked in with his legal team, somehow looking even more polished in handcuffs. He caught my eye and smiled, that same confident, controlling smile. "All rise," the bailiff called. The hearing proceeded like a choreographed dance. Oliver's lawyer cited his community standing, his business responsibilities, his charitable works. The prosecution countered with flight risk concerns and the mounting evidence of financial crimes. Then Oliver did something unexpected. He asked to address the court. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying that familiar persuasive charm, "I've made mistakes. But everything I did was out of love, for Marlo, for my company, for the people who depend on me." I felt Marlo tense beside me. "These accusations come from misunderstandings and jealousy." His eyes found mine, particularly from those who might benefit from my downfall. "That's not—" I started to stand, but my father's hand on my shoulder stopped me. "Wait," he murmured. Oliver continued, "I'm prepared to make full restitution. To demonstrate my good faith, I've already arranged to clear Miss Thompson's credit card debt." Marlo's sharp intake of breath drew attention. She stood slowly, shrugging off our mother's restraining hand. "Your Honor." Her voice shook but grew stronger with each word. "May I speak?" The judge considered, then nodded. "The debt Oliver mentions? He created it. He convinced me to spend money I didn't have, promised to handle it, then used it to control me. Just like he used my insecurities, my family's expectations, and my fear of disappointing everyone." Oliver's mask slipped slightly. "Marlo, darling." "I'm not finished." She stepped forward. "I've spent weeks thinking I was stupid for falling for his manipulation. But I'm not the stupid one. He is. Because he underestimated my sister. He underestimated me. He thought money and charm could buy him whatever he wanted." "Miss Thompson," the judge interrupted, "do you have evidence of these claims?" "Yes, Your Honor." My father stepped forward, holding a familiar folder. Financial records, witness statements, and recordings documenting a pattern of manipulation and fraud extending well beyond my daughter's case. Oliver's lawyers huddled around him, whispering urgently, but his eyes remained locked on Marlo. "You ungrateful little," he started, but his lawyer grabbed his arm. Too late. The mask had cracked completely, revealing the rage beneath. He shrugged off his lawyer's restraint. Everything I gave you, everything I promised, you're throwing it away for what? Some misguided sense of family loyalty. No, Marlowe said quietly. I'm choosing myself. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. That's enough. Bail denied. Defendant will be remanded until trial. As officers approached to escort Oliver out, he turned to me one last time. This isn't over. You have no idea what's coming. Actually, I stood, finally letting months of anger surface. It is over. Your lawyer didn't just send evidence about your crimes against Marlowe. She sent everything. Every scheme, every victim, every corrupt deal. It's all coming out. The color drained from his face as understanding hit. His own attorney had betrayed him, just as he had betrayed everyone else. Later, outside the courthouse, my mother pulled both Marlowe and me into an unexpected hug. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have seen it. Should have listened. We all should have, my father added. Marlowe squeezed my hand. You did. You saw everything. Not everything, I admitted. I was so focused on exposing Oliver, I almost missed what really mattered. Us, this family, being honest with each other. Speaking of honesty, my father cleared his throat. There are some things we need to discuss. About favorites and fairness and how we move forward. I looked at my family, really looked at them, and saw something I'd missed before. The possibility of change, of healing. Of building something stronger from the broken pieces Oliver left behind. Yes, I said. Let's talk. 6 months after Oliver's arrest, I stood in my childhood bedroom, packing away the last traces of who I used to be. The trial was over, the headlines fading, and life was settling into a new normal. Marlowe had moved back home temporarily, working remotely for a design firm that actually valued her talent. Found something, she called from the hallway, waving an old photo album. Remember this? We sat on my bed, flipping through pictures of 2 sisters who used to be inseparable. Before expectations and favoritism drove us apart. Before Oliver. I was always trying to be you, Marlowe admitted, touching a photo where she'd clearly copied my hairstyle. Perfect, responsible Alara. I thought if I couldn't be that, I had to be something completely different. I wanted to be you, I countered. Everyone loved you so easily. Not everyone. She closed the album. The right people loved you all along. I was just too blind to see it. A knock at the door interrupted us. Our father stood there, holding an envelope. Before you finish packing, he said, there's something you should read. Inside was a letter, dated years ago, written in his familiar handwriting. Dear Alara, I'm writing this on your first day at university, watching you build your own path despite our mistakes. Your mother and I failed you, me especially. I let my fear of conflict silence my pride in your strength, your integrity, your fierce protection of those you love. I kept this letter, adding to it every time you achieved something we didn't properly celebrate. Every time you stood up for what was right, even when we didn't listen. What happened with Oliver showed me the cost of silence. You saw the truth when we were blinded by appearances. You fought for your sister when we couldn't. You showed me what real strength looks like. I'm giving you this now because you're packing up your old life, and I want you to know, you never needed to prove yourself. You never needed to compete for love. You were always enough, exactly as you are. Love, Dad. I looked up to find both my parents in the doorway now, my mother wiping tears. We're selling the house, my father announced quietly. What? Marlowe and I spoke in unison. It's time for a fresh start, our mother explained. Somewhere without all these old patterns and memories. Besides, my father added, the money will help with Marlowe's debt and your down payment on that condo you've been eyeing. Dad, you don't have to. We want to, my mother cut in. We want to do better, be better. For both of you. Later that evening, as we sorted through more boxes, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Oliver had attempted to make a deal, offering to expose others involved in his schemes. Are you going to read it? Marlowe asked, seeing my hesitation. No, I decided, putting the phone away. His story isn't ours anymore. She nodded, understanding. Speaking of stories, Katie called. She's starting a support group for women who've survived relationships like. Well, she asked if I'd help. Will you? I think so. Turn it into something good. She paused, then added, she asked about you too. Said they could use someone who knows how to spot the warning signs. I thought about Oliver's other victims, about all the others still out there, trapped in beautiful cages of manipulation and control. Maybe I said, but first, I need to finish something. I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked, waiting. What are you writing? Marlo peered over my shoulder. Our story. The real one. I began typing. Not about Oliver, but about us. About family and forgiveness and finding your voice. And revenge, she asked with a small smile. No, I replied, thinking of the letter in my pocket. About justice. And healing. And how sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming who you were always meant to be. Marlo squeezed my shoulder and left me to write. Outside, moving boxes waited to be filled. Downstairs, our parents were planning a future free from old mistakes. And here, in this room where everything began, I started our story the only way I could. My name is Alara, and this is how my sister and I saved each other.